Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, and a very warm welcome to day 2 of the 31st Cambridge Alumni Festival. I'm Bruce Mortimer, the university's Director of Alumni Engagement and Events. We are delighted that you and nearly 5,000 of your fellow alumni from 106 countries around the world have registered for this year's festival. This afternoon's program commences with the most popular of the 98 sessions that are on offer this year, and one which I'm sure will be a highlight of the festival. To introduce our speaker, Dr. Giles Yeo is a program leader at the MRC Metabolic Diseases Unit at the University of Cambridge, researching the influence of genes on feeding behaviour and body weight. He is a fellow of Wolfson College and honorary president of the British Dietetic Association. A science broadcaster and author, Giles's first book, Gene Eating, was published in December 2018, and his second, Why Calories Don't Count, came out in June this year. Giles was awarded an MBE in the Queen's 2020 Birthday Honours for services to research, communication, and engagement. We're thrilled to welcome Dr. Yeo to tell us why calories don't count. At the conclusion of Dr. Yeo's talk, there will be time for a Q&A. Dr. Yeo, over to you.
Thank you very much, Bruce. Guys, hello. This is a very odd situation. I just wanted, do you know where I am? I'm stood in Lady Mitchell Hall. I don't know if you guys, any of you ever took classes here, but I teach a couple of classes here. And so it's slightly odd and this cavernous sound. But I understand, and you have to be questioning your life decisions, ladies and gentlemen, that 700 of you have actually signed up to listen to me. You may regret this yet. So very, very welcome. And I'm here to talk to you guys about calories today. But not only am I a fellow at Wolfson, I just wanted to tell you, but I'm a fellow one of you. I'm also an alumnus of the university. And I did my PhD here in Cambridge, Wolfson College, and I matriculated in 1994. So from one alum to all of the various alumni all over the world, very, very welcome. Thank you so much for being here. And I'm here to talk about that most pesky of measures, the calorie, and really about why they don't count. Okay, stop. Before you guys start atting me and throwing oranges at me, clearly they count to some degree, all right? I mean, like 200 calories of chips is clearly twice the number of chips, twice the amount of chips than 100 calories of chips. I understand that. But so is 200 grams of chips, okay? Twice the number of chips than 100 grams of chips. Would you be trying to compare 200 grams of chips to 200 grams of carrots? And I guess this is what I'm going to be talking to you guys about today. They count, but are we counting them? Are we considering them in the right in the right way? Okay. So calorie counts are ubiquitous, and I think they're ubiquitous everywhere. And what I have listed here on the left-hand panel is the EU/UK. For the moment, at any rate, mandated calorie information. So the top bit is the front of pack, and then the bottom is the back of pack information that comes either in the traffic light labels or in the monochrome labels. Okay, and they list the sins, you know, that you're actually going to get from your food. To the right-hand side of the panel is the US FDA compliant labeling. So this is the stuff you actually see in the United States. And here are the energy-based information, so calories. And you'll see a number of different things. So in the US, you actually see the word calories, except it's spelled with a capital C. This will become relevant in 3 seconds, all right? But then if you actually look at the UK and EU labeling, you either see kJs or kcals. And so I think it's useful to at least get past the nomenclature of what I mean and what I will be meaning when I actually speak about calories. So what is a calorie? Now, just from its most basic sense, it's a unit of heat, okay? A calorie, and this is a small c calorie, a so-called heat calorie, is the amount of energy it takes to raise 1 milliliter of water 1 degree Celsius at sea level. Okay, so that's a small c calorie. However, most of us, when we talk about calories, and the entire talk I'm going to be speaking about calories today, is a food calorie. And this is different from the heat calorie in a sense where a food calorie is 1,000 heat calories. So sometimes they just write it with a capital C. which is fine in writing, but problematic because a capital C calorie is pronounced exactly the same way as a small c calorie. Okay, but because there's 1,000 small c calories, it's otherwise called a kilocalorie, kcal, okay, when it's actually there, or a big C calorie, as I've said, and that's what they tend to use in the United States. Now, from an SI unit perspective, because a calorie may be a unit of energy, but it's not an SI unit, an SI unit of energy is in joules, then 1 calorie, a heat calorie, is 4.184 joules, round up to 4.2 joules, and therefore 1 food calorie, 1 kilocalorie, is 4.2 kilojoules, or kJ. And that's where the kcal and the kJ numbers come from. But just be assured that when I speak about calories, and I'll just use the word calorie, I am speaking about the kilocalorie, the big C calorie, or 4.2 kilojoules. Okay? That's it. That's the nomenclature out of the way. We can now get on to actually talking about things. So, why don't calories count? Okay? And it's because of this. This is not an equation per se, but let's just call it an equation. That's because the number of total calories in a food does not equal the number of calories you see on the side of packaged food, okay? Which, in of itself, does not equal the total number of calories you're able to get and use within your body. Okay? And so this is my argument why they don't actually count. And this is the whole concept of caloric availability. Now, caloric availability is the total number of calories you're able to extract from a food as opposed to the number of calories, as opposed to the total number of calories in the food. And those numbers do not come anywhere close to being equal. Okay? So let me give you a couple of examples. So if you ate 100 calories of sugar, okay, you would get pretty close to 100 calories of sugar, of calories back out. Because sugar, sucrose, which is what we're dealing with, is 1 molecule of glucose, 1 molecule of fructose, 1 cut, we absorb it. All right? And so it's probably what I'm going to call 97% to 98% available, which means for every 100 calories, you end up getting about 97 to 98 calories. Now, let's take an extreme example, just as a comparator. Sweet corn, corn on the cob, okay? Now, all of us know that if you have 100 calories of sweet corn, right? And then look in the loo the next day, it's pretty clear that you have absorbed nowhere close to 100 calories of sweet corn, okay, because of the unavailability of the calories in the form of sweet corn. Yet, when you actually take those corn kernels and you desiccate them and you pound them into a meal, corn meal, and make a corn tortilla, you make corn bread, suddenly a far greater percentage of the calories are made available to you because of the way the food has been processed. So this sweet corn phenomenon is the concept of caloric availability. So how are calories empirically measured? So how are calories actually, the total number of calories actually measured in a food? It's a unit of heat. And this was actually, the way that it was worked out is probably a couple hundred years old, and it's using bomb calorimetry. Now, what is bomb calorimetry? It is as unsophisticated as it actually sounds, okay? So what you do is you take a desiccated amount of food, desiccated, dried, because water doesn't have any caloric content to human beings. Now, if I were a nuclear power reactor, yes, water, I'd be able to break the atoms of water, but human beings cannot, okay? So water itself does not contain any usable calories to us, so we can dry it off, we can just evaporate it. So you take the desiccated food, you put it into a sealed container, and in effect, flambe it. You kind of burn it to a crisp, okay? Now, while this is the eponymous bomb. Now, this bomb, the sealed container where you're actually gonna toast the food, is then surrounded by a water jacket of known volume. So put simply, you burn the food and you measure the amount of temperature the water in the water jacket rises by. And that is the total number of calories in a food. That is still how it's done today. Okay, it sounds completely ludicrous, but that is how it's done today. And I guess my point being here is that human beings, living creatures, are not bomb calorimeters, okay? We eat the food, we digest the food, and at the end of the day, digestion is not a bonfire to actually burn everything there. Digestion is, except for a little bit of chewing maybe and a bit of a washing machine sound, the peristalsis within your stomach, it's actually one long chemical reaction. It's a relatively gentle process. So depending on what food we eat, our body is able to extract X amount of calories from there, and those are not going to equal the total number of calories that are there. Okay? So this is the reason why all calories are not equal. So that's it. Okay? That is how we get the total number of calories in the food. Now let's go to B. How did we get from A, the total number of calories in a food, to B, the number of calories on the side of the packet that we all see everywhere in the world today? Now for this, we can blame a guy called William Olin Atwater. Now he was a professor of chemistry from Wesleyan University in Connecticut. And this is work he did between 1880 and 1900. Yes, you heard right, 1880 to 1900. So this is work that's more than 120, 140 years old. So Professor Atwater, understood the sweet corn concept. And so he was curious as to, well, okay, well, how much food were we actually absorbing? And so what he did between 1880 and 1900, and I want you to consider this story I'm going to tell you anytime you want to complain about your job ever again, all right? So what he did was he started with food, so thousands of types of food, okay, carrots, celery, sausages, steak, whatever. And he burnt a lot of them so that he could understand the total calorie content in all these foods. Then he fed these foods to human beings, fasted human beings, and then burnt their poop. That's right, okay? For 20 years, he burnt lots of food, he burnt lots of poop, all right? And then what he then did was then worked out what and how much we were actually able to absorb as human beings. And in effect, and I'll just go to the money shot, so to speak, at the end. And he actually worked out his Atwater factors. And the Atwater factors are, famously, for those of you who actually have studied any nutrition at all, that for every there is going to be 9 calories for every gram of fat, 4 calories for every gram of carb, and 4 calories for every gram of protein that we actually eat. Okay? And so this have become the so-called Atwater factors. But if you look at the table that I'm actually providing, you'll see that the numbers are not exactly 4, 4, and 9, and they differ between whether or not you're talking about animal-based protein, plant-based protein, plant-based carbs, etc., etc. He just rounded these numbers up, all right? Which is fine, which is absolutely fine. But yet, every single calorie in every single place that you see calories today, packages, online recipes, your favorite restaurants that are there are based on Atwater's numbers from 120 years ago. You guys are now going to go to your fridge and look and say, he's wrong, he's wrong. There's going to be some wobble. Okay, so it's not exactly 944, and that is down largely to the fact that people use different methods for calculating the total amount of protein in a food. But 944 is the basis of all the calorie counts we see today. 120 years old using bomb calorimetry, okay? So, you know, we've put man on the moon, we've flown to Mars, we've done all kinds of things, but yet our calorie counts, nutrition, I would argue some of the most important things we should be considering about human health is based on numbers from 120 years ago. So that's how we got to B. Okay? But what's the problem? Okay, because I think he did a damn good job, if I might say so, all right, for 120 years old. He actually calculated, put the numbers through, and those numbers have largely stood the test of time. The problem is, okay, this still does not equal the total number of usable calories we're able to get out of the food. And why is this the case? Because Atwater could not take into account the amount of energy it takes to metabolize the food that we actually eat. And I'm going to come and explain to you what I mean by this in a second, okay? There are 2 steps in the whole process of converting food into calories. The first process is digestion, and we've all heard about this. That's the chewing, you swallow it, goes down your esophagus, your stomach, and out the other side, okay? So this is the digestion portion. But then what then happens is when you digest the food, the macronutrients, and the 3 key macronutrients are going to be carbohydrates, and these can be in pure sugar form, the powdered white stuff, or as starches. And these are then converted into sugars and into the blood. Protein is then converted into amino acids within our gastrointestinal tract before it's absorbed in the body, and fat is converted into fatty acids, and these are then transported within our bloodstream. But these are not, in of themselves, energy. They're units of food, but transportable food. And so Atwater got to that stage, but he then couldn't work out how much energy it took to break down glucose, fatty acids, amino acids into energy in of themselves, okay? So, and a key part of this whole process is going to be considering the protein and the fiber, and I'll talk about that as we get there, okay? Protein. So now when we're actually talking about protein, what is absolutely key about protein, and some of you may actually know this anecdotally or otherwise, is that a calorie of protein makes you feel fuller than a calorie of fat, than a calorie of carb. In that order, okay? It's like I said, a calorie is supposed to be a unit of energy, yet a calorie of protein makes you feel fuller than a calorie of carb. Why is that the case? Well, that's because we have to understand this so-called food-to-poop tube. And there are a couple of basic principles that I think we can safely use. And first is that food that takes longer to digest will generally make you feel fuller. Okay, now this is a critical thing to say. Why is that? Because when we're eating something, and when we swallow and it goes down into the stomach and out the other side, the moment we take that first bite, our body, our gastrointestinal tract, our food-to-poop tube, begins to give off hormones. And what these hormones do is they circulate in the blood and signal to the brain, okay? And there are probably about 20 gut hormones that we actually know about, 18 of which make you feel fuller, okay? And so the farther down the gut your food goes, the more of these gut hormones are released and the fuller you feel, okay? So this is the biology of the system. And what happens is protein takes the longest to take apart. It's the most complex of all the 3 macronutrients to take apart, and so protein ends up traveling further down the gut before it actually is able to be absorbed into the body, which is one of the reasons why it actually makes you feel fuller. So if I might have a little bit of an interlude, I hope you will give me this luxury. Have you ever considered how much energy it takes to boil a kettle of water? Now let's assume a liter. Okay, most kettles, certainly in the UK, are a liter and a half, but assuming you're doing a liter, okay? How much energy in calories does it actually take to do this? Now, if 1 calorie is the amount of energy it takes to raise 1 liter of water 1 degree Celsius, then if you want to raise 1 liter of water 100 degrees Celsius, you only need 100 calories. And actually, when tap water comes out of the tap, it's already at, 15 degrees? It's certainly not at 0, okay? So actually, to boil a kettle of water only takes 85 calories. Now, if you consider how much 100 or 85 calories is, that's the total number of calories you might find in an average-sized egg. So here's the thing, okay? Given that we, as human beings, eat on average 2,000 to 2,500 to 3,000 calories a day, firstly, and second, we only have around 5 to 5.5 liters of blood running around in us. How come we are not boiling? Because that is actually enough energy. 2,000 calories is enough energy to raise 20 liters of water. Boil it from freezing to boiling. How come we're not actually bursting into flame? How come our blood is not boiling away? The reason behind that is because we're not, as I said previously, we're not bomb calorimeters. We're not a bonfire. If we actually burnt all the food that was desiccated, yes, it would give off all the heat all at once. But that would be incompatible with life for us. So what our body does is it metabolizes the calories and actually puts them in little units of usable energy, okay? Little poofs of energy. And it does so in primarily by using what we call ATP, adenosine triphosphate. And look, you've got to consider this as sort of like a battery that's actually empty or a battery that's actually going to be, that's charged, okay? So, and the critical thing here is in the triphosphate pit, because it takes a lot of energy to put those phosphate groups together. That's just the chemical basis of this. So when you actually convert ATP, adenosine triphosphate, to ADP, adenosine diphosphate, meaning you lose a phosphate group, okay, you give off that unit of energy. Poof, a little bit of energy, and your body is able to use that energy to walk, to do whatever it is, to just stand here and wave my arms, all right? And then as you actually eat food, and your food is then metabolized, it's then used to stuff another phosphate group back onto ADP to convert it to ATP again. And this cycles, releasing energy as and when you actually need it. A human being will go through, and this number is correct, your own body weight of ATP every day, recycling it, recycles it, giving off energy. Your body weight, okay, of ATP is used every day to make sure you stay alive, make sure you keep moving. Okay, this is why we don't actually evaporate, shall we say, when we actually eat food. So back to this, when we're actually talking about metabolism, and you consider, so I've already said that when food is absorbed into you, amino acids, glucose, fatty acids, these are intermediate nutrients. Now, for those of you who've done any biochemistry, those medics amongst you, those of you I've actually taught, I want to forgive you for actually bringing up intermediary metabolism. Maybe some of you are having PTSDs about this. But actually, this is the whole process of metabolizing your food. And there's amino acids, glucose, and fatty acids. And there's two different ways, two different things that happen when you eat food. You either store it or you have to use it. Okay, those are the two ways. Now, glucose and fatty acids are made exclusively of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen in different configurations, but those are the only three atoms that are actually used to make glucose and fatty acids. As a result, you can actually convert between them relatively simply, and you can actually store or burn them relatively simply, okay? The problem with protein or amino acids is, yes, of course, their basis is going to be carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, but crucially, protein also contains nitrogen, okay? Now, the other thing about protein is we don't have a store of protein, not in the same way we have a store of fat or store of carbs and glycogen, all right? So yes, you might say, well, I have muscles. Isn't that a store? That's not a store. It's functional, okay? It's there for you to actually move things. It's a cell wall. It's all the enzymes. All the protein we have in us is functional. It's not being stored for a rainy day. So if you don't need it, either you're working out or there's damage that you need to repair, then you have to get rid of it. And you get rid of it by actually converting it into fat in order to store, okay, when you actually have too much protein on board. The problem is you need to get rid of the nitrogen. And so the nitrogen is then chemically removed from protein, converted into urea, which we wee out or poop out. Okay, and then that skeleton is then able to be stored as fat. This costs energy. It takes energy in order to do this. And as a result, protein is very expensive to handle. And so much so that for every 100 calories of protein that you eat, Atwater calories of protein that you eat, we only ever absorb 70 calories, 70% available. 30% of the calories that we eat of protein are given off as heat in actually trying to manage protein. If you look at the back of every single pack, okay, it does not take into account this heat that is given off when we have to deal with food. So that's protein. Now, fat is very, very energy dense, so it's nearly 100% available, okay, which means that Atwater's fat calories are accurate. So for you have 100 calories of fat, it's pretty close to 100 calories that you're going to absorb. Carbs are somewhere in the middle. Now it depends if you're eating the powdered white stuff, sugar, or whether or not you're eating complex carbohydrates, okay? And if you're eating the powdered white stuff, sugar, then like I said, it's around 97, 98%. Whereas if we're talking about complex carbohydrates with the presence of fiber, which I'm going to come to in a second, then it becomes more difficult for your body to take it apart. Which means that if you're having a slice of wholemeal toast, or if you're having whole grains, then it's probably going to take you anywhere from 90 to 92%, okay, of availability. It takes 8 to 10 calories, 8 to 10% of the calories are actually dealt with actually handling it. So the caloric availability and popular diets. How about that? All right, because actually this is not a diet talk. It is. It is because the moment you begin to think about caloric availability and how your body handles calories, then you begin to realize that actually much of the popular diets, if not all of them out there that work because of this concept of caloric availability. So look, any diet that gets you to lose Any diet that gets you to eat less is a diet that works, because after all, there is energy balance, okay? Which means that this is the first law of thermodynamics. We can't invent calories. We have to eat more than we burn to gain weight. Ergo, we have to burn more than we eat in order to lose weight. Now, just 2 seconds. People might say, that's oversimplistic. It is, but it's physics, so it's still going to be true. This is the how. Now, what I happen to study, which I won't be talking about today, what I happen to study is the why. Why do people behave so differently around food? Why do people respond to stress by eating? Why do people respond to stress by not eating? Okay? It's the same hormone, it's cortisol. Why do some people love food? And so all of these different behaviors of food, how you behave around food, ultimately influences the physics, and that's what I study. Anyway, back to diets again. So if you actually look at every single diet that works, and you amongst the audience would probably have tried a majority of these diets, okay, they need to create a caloric deficit, a calorie deficit. And there are 3 basic principles, and these are not mutually exclusive, okay? You can have diets that actually practice calorie restriction overtly, okay? You can have diets that are high in protein, and diets that are high in fiber. And I'm going to give you a few examples in a second. So calorie restriction, let's just deal with this first because this is the easiest. Now this is actually, I am going on a diet, I am going to eat less. So this is, for example, low calorie diet. I'm only going to have 800 calories today. I'm going to drink the shake today, whatever it is, okay? Weight Watchers, Slim Fast, or intermittent fasting even. So these are actually overt efforts to get to eat less, caloric restriction, okay? So these are the diets that, as long as you stick to, will actually get you to lose weight. But what we're talking about today, about caloric availability, it becomes a little bit more insidious about the way the diet industry actually markets them. So let's think about high protein, okay? Because we're talking about high protein and fiber. So first of all, how high is high? I would have thought, because there is no industry standard for what high protein means, but if I actually look through all the various papers and what people are comparing, broadly speaking, anything in which the total amount of energy in your diet, 16% is made out of protein or higher, that is considered a high protein diet. So in the West or in high income countries, we're looking at probably around 15 to 16% being the average in a well-fed population. Okay, so this is what it is. So anything above 16% is going to be considered high protein. So now there are a lot of diets out there. Okay, particularly the most popular ones today are #LCHF, low carb, high fat diets. Okay, now you realize there's no protein actually mentioned in there, and it's all about the carbs. It's all about restricting the carbs, and that's true. These are, and I've listed a few of them here: Atkins, Dukan, Southwest, Keto, and the ridiculous carnivore diet. And I've listed them in order of severity of carbohydrate restriction. But, and this is the big but here, if you remove a source of energy from somewhere, and carbs are a major source of our calories typically, you have to replace the calories, the energy, with something else. Yes, you could replace it with fat, but most of us know that fat in of itself is quite unpalatable. We don't eat butter by itself. We put butter on carbs, we put butter on toast, okay, and that becomes really delicious. But fat in of itself is really quite unpalatable. We replace a large amount of those calories with protein. So all of these #LCHF diets are high in protein, all right? Which is why they typically work, which is why? Because protein makes you feel fuller. What happens when you're full? You eat less. What happens when you eat less? You lose weight, okay? So that is how all of the LCHF diets work. Now, how about LCHF diets, but with a complicated backstory? I'll just give you a couple of examples. Gluten-free. Now, okay, 1% of the human species is celiac. Okay, so please, allergic to gluten, so please stay away from gluten, all right? And I would probably say 3 to 4% of the human species are legitimately gluten intolerant. And this can range anywhere from being slightly farty to severe gastrointestinal distress. So probably you want to stay away from gluten as well there. But 25% of us, okay, are buying gluten-free, you know, just going out and buying gluten-free, so much so that it's become a selling point. They're now taking foods that had never had gluten before in its entire life. Right, gluten-free rice. Rice does not have gluten, all right? Gluten-free water, I bet you this bottle of water here says it's gluten-free. I can't read it under my glasses. Gluten-free shampoo, not that I know much about shampoo, but if you actually Google gluten-free shampoo, millions of hits, okay, for that. But the reality of it is that when people go gluten-free, they tend to give up wheat, oats, et cetera, but actually, they also give up grains in general because people don't know what has gluten and what doesn't have gluten. Gluten-free is a pretty low-carb diet, and as a result, it's higher in protein, which is why it works. And how about paleo? Now, paleo, this is the Paleolithic diet. This is eating like cavemen because we have not got used to agriculture yet. The Paleolithic, short for Paleolithic. The problem with the paleo diet is that a couple of reasons, and then I won't spend too long talking about this, is that first of all, if there is a single Paleolithic diet, it assumes there was a single Paleolithic people, which obviously there wasn't. Because I could have been an Inuit, an Eskimo on the Arctic ice sheet, Greenland ice sheet. I could be a hunter-gatherer on the Serengeti. I could be a hunter-gatherer in the Amazonian rainforest. Now, depending on where you were, if you were an Inuit, yes, you probably were going to be eating oily fish and seal and whale blubber, whatever it is. Okay, not a vegetable to be seen. Whereas if you were on the Serengeti, the likelihood is you're going to be largely vegetarian, if only because it takes a lot of energy to take down an antelope. Okay, so anyway, it's a ridiculous thing. But paleo tends to be very, very high in protein. People imagine Fred Flintstone's fantasy diet, right? High in protein, which is why it actually works. All right. So I'm going to skip through this bit. How about fiber? And I'll deal with a couple of things about fiber. Close up, and then we'll actually do Q&A. Now remember, I was telling you about the carbs. Okay, when the carbs. Now if we're dealing with sugar, which doesn't have any fiber in it, then they're very calorically available because it's sugar. We can actually absorb it. Whereas the moment we're talking about whole grains, the moment we're talking about wholemeal toast, quinoa, sweet corn, lentils, okay, suddenly they become far less calorically available. Why? Because of the presence of fiber. And the thing about fiber is pretty much only found in plants. You're not going to find fiber in an animal, okay? Doesn't exist. So fiber fiber is going to come almost exclusively from plants. So now one of the other things which I happen to do, and aside from being an academic here, is I present some documentaries for the BBC. And I present one called Trust Me, I'm a Doctor, in which they asked me to go onto a vegan diet for a number of weeks to see how healthy it was. Now, guys, there are going to be many reasons why you might choose to go on a vegan diet, and I think planetary health, your own health, and ethical reasons. These are all perfectly legitimate. But let's deal with it just from a health perspective, all right? Now, by the way, incidentally, when you begin to look at vegan foods, there's some really interesting things. I found this collection of vegan foods here. Okay, this is from Tesco's. Other supermarkets are available, ladies and gentlemen. I can't see it, I'm sorry. It's miles away from me, but I know the slide because I made it. And you can see it's bacon rashers, it's classical, it's savory, it's delicious. Okay, it doesn't have, it's entirely, what does it say? It's entirely vegan. These are bacon rashers with no additional, no false ingredients, and yet they're vegan. I said, oh my God, this is like some magical product. Anyway, now I realize when they mean there is no artificial flavors, there's no artificial bacon flavoring. They probably use smoked paprika and turmeric. Anyway, but being vegan doesn't automatically mean healthy, as I begin to realize, because I could have spent the entire time eating faux bacon rashers, or Oreos for that matter. So I decided to be plant-based because I was looking at the health-based aspect of it, which means eating whole foods, pulses, beans, lentils, sweet corn, whole foods, and I spent 4 weeks on that. So what were the numbers on the door? I ended up losing 4 kilos of weight, okay, over 29 days. 4 kilos, that's nearly 10 or 11 pounds. So the question is why? And the reason is not because of the magical vegan diet per se, but because of the presence of the fiber. Because the food, it takes a lot of lentils to match the calories in a steak. And the reason behind that is because we don't absorb a lot of the gross weight of food we actually eat. You see lentils, they go in shaped like a flying saucer. They come out shaped like a flying saucer. We hardly actually deal with them, right, when we're doing that. And it's only so much time in a day we can chew. So the reason I lost weight was because I ate less because of the presence of fiber. Now, when we actually begin to back off and say, ooh, okay, well then let's look at diets that are high in fiber. Now, there are many out there. There's going to be the plant-based ones, which I just talked about, which was an effective way for me to eat less. And so much so, I love my meat too much, but I'm flexitarian. I'm vegan at least twice a week, okay? And low GI, low glycemic index. This is the effect of drinking orange juice versus eating an orange. Okay? Where when you drink orange juice, you stripped out the fiber, whereas when you're eating an orange, you have the fiber, and therefore it takes longer for the body to be able to extract the sugar, even though you're eating exactly the same amount of sugar. And that's the Mediterranean diet, okay, which is not plant-based, but it has a lot of fibers and whole grains. Then that plant-based, effectively, but with complex backstory. So for example, the ridiculous alkaline diet. The alkaline diet is based on this, the fact that our blood is alkali, around pH 7.4. And so some people have begun to think, oh my God, that's the healthy pH. Therefore we have to eat alkali food in order to be healthy. Guys, a couple of reasons, a couple of things. First of all, it ignores the presence of the stomach, which is pH 1.5. Everything we eat is acidified within the stomach, and as it comes out into the small intestine, is neutralized to 7, all right? So the alkali diet, nonsense. And on top of that, the alkali community consider lemons and other citrus fruit alkali, except that lemons are full of citric acid, being as they are citrus fruits, and they're full of ascorbic acid, otherwise known as vitamin C. Stop. We aren't going to talk about this. The reason why I'm listing it here is because the alkali community consider meat and dairy products and animal-based protein acidic. Alkali is largely a plant-based diet, which is why it works, which is people actually go for it. And the last one I want to talk about here is cert food. New to me, I had to Google this, but Adele, the singer Adele. Now she appeared, I think it was 18 months, 2 years ago, half the size. She'd shed a load of weight. And if I might just say what really annoyed me is the breathless reporting, okay, about how she became more of a woman because she was now less of a woman. What was wrong with her before? All right, but let's ignore that. The cert food diet, if you look it up, is a very, very restrictive plant-based diet, which is why it actually works. Okay, so I'm going to skip this thing here for a second. And look, I'm going to close up and do Q&A. Is it true, though, ladies and gentlemen, that the vast majority of non-communicable diseases in the world today, we are clearly in the middle of a communicable disease pandemic, is it true that the vast majority of non-communicable diseases that are diet-related? Yes, it is. So we have to fix our diet. We have to fix the food environment that we're in. But we're not going to do it by fearing food. We're not going to do it by cutting it, by removing it, all right? Now, if you want to ask about what fearing food is, Goop. I don't want to drive clicks to Goop, but Goop is Gwyneth Paltrow's website, in which she is trying to promote your leanest livable weight. That is as little as you can eat without dying. Okay, isn't that what your leanest livable weight means? If that does not indicate to you what a fear of food is, I don't know what does. I gave this similar talk when we could live, okay, 2 years ago. The media were there, they picked this up. This is from the Independent, okay? This is Cambridge geneticist in argument with Gwyneth Paltrow. I've never met her. Don't fear food, ladies and gentlemen. So, why don't calories count? Because we eat food and not calories, please. Think about that. We eat food and our body extracts the calories. And if you focus on your health, your weight, ladies and gentlemen, will take care of itself. So this is the book. So what should we count instead of calories? People always ask, so I thought I'd added this. So I think what we've got to do is this. We have to think about the amount of protein we eat. There's a sweet spot, and that tends to be 16%. That's the number you should count. 16, the amount of protein you should be having in your diet. Okay? Fiber. You need to be having about 30 grams. We're at the moment, as a population, only 15. We need to double the amount of fiber we're actually eating to more than 30 grams a day. The more the merrier, actually. 5% are the amounts we want to try and limit our sugars, free sugars, rather than sugars tied up in fruit and fiber. Okay, free sugars we actually eat in our diet. And please do consider meat-free days, both for your health and both for the health of the planet. So thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to come here to do the Q&A, and I'm so sorry I went a little longer than I intended. Right. Let's see. Okay, good. We got this in order. Now, Garth, let me just have some water. Garth, should we avoid processed foods? Garth, should we avoid processed foods if they contain more calories than the raw ingredients? They can't contain more calories than the raw ingredients. So here's the thing. The raw ingredients has the maximum number of calories that are there, and you can't actually get more than that, but you can get a larger proportion of the calories. So I think a good scenario, in fact, one of the things which I'm trying to propose is to almost indicate the caloric availability of the food so that you can make that call. So you can say, oh, wait a minute, this food is only, based on Atwater's calories, 80% caloric available compared to 90%. So maybe I'll have the 80% one rather than 90% one. From Deborah. Atwater is an ironic name given what you said about the bomb calorimeter and water. Touche. I think it's Tim Spector that argues that different calories mean different things to different people. I know I'm a happier camper getting my calories from fat than carbs. Is it because of the microbiome? I think the microbiome is going to play some role, because clearly it is there, it's the first line of defense, so to speak, which your food hits. So it will definitely play a role in not only how we handle fat, how we handle carbohydrates, how we handle sugars, how we handle some proteins as well. But it's not only your microbiome that's only going to play a role. There's going to be other metabolic things as well. I didn't even talk about today about the genetics underlying our metabolism and the rate of metabolism in our body, for example. And that's also going to play a role. And then on top of that, what we do with the calories. When we actually deal with them, some people are more likely to burn them than store them. Some people are likely to store them than burn them. And so there's also that aspect to consider. Another anonymous attendee, please share your thoughts on refined sugar and how it has been proven that our brains signal we have not eaten if we ingest it. Okay, let me clarify what that is. So here is the interesting thing, particularly refined sugar in drinks, okay? Because when we consume sugar and say we're actually eating it, and particularly if it's within a food, there's the chewing action. And this chewing action, mastication, then it triggers the rest of your body to prepare for the receipt of calories, okay? It's thinking, oh, calories are gonna come in. The problem with refined sugars, but in particular, in drinks, because we are not really evolved to drink our calories except for when we were little tiny babies and drank milk. But we're really not designed to drink our calories, is if we drink orange juice or Coca-Cola or whatever it is you want to drink, there is no chewing. And so what happens is the liquid goes through, there's no digestion because it goes through the stomach and it gets absorbed very, 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 very quickly. So it is like we haven't eaten, because we haven't been doing the chewing. At some point, your body catches up. Then you go, oh, wait a minute, I'm absorbing calories. But you're right to a degree that it is sort of like your brain thinking you haven't eaten. Garth again. Is BMI a useful indicator for health? This is a very good question. BMI, body mass index, and this is your weight in kilograms divided by your height in meters square. And it is useful for a population-wide purposes, for tracking the health of a population. Why? Because it is free to calculate. Okay, you just need your weight and your height, so you can deploy it very, very widely. It's also free of imagination. So in other words, if you don't have to remember what you ate or remember how much you exercised or anything else, because it's very, very, it's empirical. The issue is, if you look at it from an individual basis, this is what happens if I'm a sports person, particularly athletic? What happens if I'm a rugby player or a sumo wrestler? Yes, this is going to be now a situation when you point out that BMI is not particularly useful. So I think the short answer is BMI is not particularly useful from an individual basis because of our differing, our age, our sex, our differing amounts of where we put the fat and how much muscle we have. But actually, on average, on a population-wide basis, the higher your BMI, the more fat you will tend to carry, And the more fat you tend to carry, the higher the likelihood of you becoming unhealthy. So BMI is useful for tracking population interventions, for example, but not useful at all from an individual basis. Okay. Another anonymous attendee, are keto diets dangerous? That's a good question. As of this talk today, I haven't seen any real high-quality, long-term human studies indicating the safety long-term of keto. Keto, however, is practiced by many people. It is a particularly useful tool, for example, among the diabetic community for maintaining their glucose levels. So I think there is going to be data that emerges about the safety of keto long-term. I think a broader problem with keto, there's not, as long as we understand why it works, the broader problem with keto in the community is when people think of keto, they think, ooh, steaks and butter. Yes, that could be keto. The problem with that is the amount of saturated fats you end up eating, and that's the bit that makes keto, that could make keto very, very dangerous. But if we consider keto, which is high in protein, okay, but instead of thinking steaks, we begin to think a mix source of protein, such as coming from beans, tofu, okay, fish, right? And instead of butter, we think of unsaturated oils, such as olive oil, nut oils. Then I think we begin to see a different shade of keto, all right, where actually it could probably be quite healthy. Long term, we have to see, but if we actually had keto, but with a mix of plant-based and fish-based protein with olive oil, then I think we could begin to think about recommending keto, as a possible option for people. How do different diets affect the microbiome? Any diet will affect the microbiome because your microbiome is primarily a reflection of not only your environment, in particularly your food environment, but also your overall health. So anything you do with your diet will influence the microbiome for good or for worse, for better or for worse. A couple of sentences, please, on alcohol in our diets. Okay, you're right. I didn't give you the Atwater numbers for alcohol. So Atwater is 9 for fat, 4 for carbs, 4 for protein. It's actually 7 for alcohol. So it's 7 calories for every gram of alcohol. So it's nearly as high caloric content of fat. And actually, in reality, I know people talk a lot about, ooh, I'm having a low-carb beer tonight, light in carbohydrates. But a lot of the calories, there are obviously going to be calories and carbs, but a lot of the calories actually come from the alcohol in it. So yes, and a bottle of wine, for example, is going to have nearly 700 to 800 calories of calories in it. Okay, and alcohol calories are actually quite available in of themselves. What is the origin of meat sweets? I don't know. I'm going to say I don't know. I'm really sorry about that. Are vegan foods particularly healthy? I think I touched on this. I think it depends what you're eating. This does depend. Plant-based foods, I think largely are actually going to be quite healthy. But vegan foods, no. A nice lady just ran down the stairs and told me 1 minute left. So let's see what other questions we have there. And also, is there an optimal time of the day to eat? And I guess I'll end with this. The Chinese have a saying, you want to eat like a 早餐吃饱, 午餐吃好, 晚餐吃少, which means this is the so-called eat like a king at lunch, at breakfast, a prince at lunch, and a pauper at dinner. We're diurnal creatures, and so we are awake when the sun is up and asleep typically when the sun is down. And so therefore our metabolism is highest during the day and lowest at night. And so unfortunately, today, our biggest meal tends to be right before we go to bed. So if we eat in the morning, there is more time during the day in which you can burn the calories rather than store the calories. It is overstated though, because at some point, energy balance and energy homeostasis will actually take over. But there is a subtle effect. So if you were trying to cut out a food, or the calories for trying to lose weight, I would advise you do it from the dinner time meal rather than from the breakfast meal. Listen, I better stop now because I think people have, we're on a schedule, ladies and gentlemen. It's been a pleasure to speak to you, virtually though it is. Do follow me on Twitter if you want to hear me bang on about things, and consider buying the book if what I've said interested you today. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Giles Yeo. Thank you to the Alumni Festival for having me here. It's been a fabulous pleasure to speak to you.